everyone. Welcome to the Bring Water to Life webinar series. Today, we are here for a webinar called Moving Water, the Great Infrastructure Challenge. Thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited to be having our second to last webinar that's scheduled so far for this year. This webinar series has been very successful again, so we're hoping to have more coming up in the future. Don't forget to check online for any upcoming webinars as we move forward. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items here. So just so everyone knows, this webinar is being recorded. We have all of our webinars available through the Bringing Water to Life webinar series on our website at irrigation.org/webinar_series. You can go there and click the links. It will take you to our YouTube page, and that's where you can watch all the webinars. You can see the presentations again and hear everything that our great panelists have to say. So this one will be available most likely tomorrow morning or afternoon. We'll send an email out to all registrants once it's available. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please feel free to type it in the chat function in your GoToWebinar toolbar. I actually sent a message there a little bit earlier, so hopefully you can all see where that is. We really are looking forward to the question and answer session at the end of this. I know both of our panelists are ready to answer your questions and look forward to kind of hearing the conversation that starts after their presentation. Lastly, Irrigation Association CEUs are available for this webinar, so please keep a record of your attendance. This webinar is worth 1 CEU. Just a quick note, we originally had a different panelist scheduled for today. Laura Ziemer from Trout Unlimited was unable to make it. I want to welcome Steve Moyer from Trout Unlimited. He stepped in to join us for this webinar today, and we still do have Dan Keppen from the Family Farm Alliance. So I wanted to note that at the top of this webinar so everybody is aware of who the 2 panelists will be today. So really quickly, as you all know, today's webinar is about infrastructure. You know, the irrigation industry, we're very heavily dependent on a 21st century water infrastructure. We need infrastructure that's reliable, and we also want to make sure that all users are taken into account. So whether that's agriculture or the environment, infrastructure is critical for all of these needs. The Irrigation Association is also a member of a coalition called the Western Agriculture and Conservation Coalition. We really believe that the interests of agriculture and conservation overlap and they go hand in hand, and that successful conservation truly depends on this collaborative effort. So with that said, we're really excited to have Dan and Steve here today to discuss some of the sustainable solutions that have benefits for both the environment and for agricultural productivity. Please make sure to ask your questions as we go. Don't be shy to insert those in the chat functionality. We'll get to those during the question and answer session. And with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan Keppen. Dan, thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to put my presentation up now. Can you see that okay?
I don't see it quite yet. There it is. Perfect.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Looks like we have a great turnout. Elizabeth, thank you for setting this up. And I just want to put a shout out to Irrigation Association. I used to be on the board of IA several years ago for 3 years. And in the last decade or so, we've done a lot of great things with IA. And I think they do a great job of outreaching to the public and educating policymakers on the importance of irrigation. And also, Steve, my good friend Steve Moyer, I'm so glad to be on this panel with you today, Steve. Thanks for joining us at the last minute. I'm going to talk, really kind of focus on some of the things that are happening relative to infrastructure in D.C., both with the 115th Congress and with the new administration, and not so new now, I guess. And then also overlap and talk about some of the things that we've been doing with Trout Unlimited and some of the other constructive partners in the conservation community on sort of win-win infrastructure fixes that benefit irrigated agriculture and the environment. So real quick, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Family Farm Alliance, we're a nonprofit advocacy group. Our mission is all about finding ways to protect and enhance water supplies for irrigated agriculture in the 17 western states, which are basically the reclamation states, those states located west of the 100th meridian. So if you draw a line down through the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, those mainland states to the west are members of the Family Farm Alliance. I got 11 board members. You have to be a producer to be on the board of directors of the Family Farm Alliance. We also have an advisory committee that consists of about 40 plus engineers, irrigation district managers, attorneys, economists that are water professionals that provide guidance. And because of this sort of arrangement that we have, we're seen as a resource on Capitol Hill and also with the agencies downtown. We've been asked to testify in the last, since 2005, 70 times on water issues and agricultural issues and environmental issues that relate to the Western United States. Some of the key things that we've been talking about will be, the topic we're talking about here today, infrastructure. Drought legislation has been a big deal in the last few years. We try to highlight the challenges that water users face due to improper administration of federal environmental laws. And we're always looking for ways to advocate permitting processes, streamlining regulations, and making sure that science drives decision-making and funding opportunities are out there to support new water development and expanded water conservation. So with this new administration, with the 115th Congress, it was pretty clear that infrastructure was going to be a priority. And it was very interesting about a year ago right now, just trying to express to policymakers how important water infrastructure is. I think a lot of you may know that are in the business that, people that aren't in the business kind of take water for granted. They think it comes out of a faucet. It just like a lot of people think that their food comes from Rayleigh's or Ralph's. So in the last year, one of our key challenges was just trying to let people know, hey, railroads and airports and freeways are great. Those are examples of infrastructure, but water is also part of the national infrastructure. And it really kind of shows. I just did a random Google search to see how different folks define infrastructure. And so this is dictionary.com, Merriam-Webster, the English Oxford Living Dictionary. You can see the various definitions there. You'll note water isn't even mentioned in any of those definitions. Wikipedia and the Cambridge English Dictionary, though, did mention it. So I found it interesting, that in all the talk of infrastructure, how, again, water is just sort of taken for granted. And in particular, irrigated, water for irrigated agriculture. We were asked to testify along with National Water Resources Association back about a year ago, I think it was April 2017, on infrastructure needs. And the whole focus of our combined NWRA Family Farm Alliance testimony that Chris Treese from Colorado provided was explaining how important water infrastructure is in the West, and including irrigated agriculture, which is our focus. Irrigated agriculture provides $186 billion a year benefit to our economy. The United States right now pays roughly 7%. The average person pays 7% of their disposable income towards food, which no other country really even comes close to that. And that's a primary reason why we have such a strong spending consumer economy, because we've got more disposable income to spend. And in part, that's because we've got affordable food, and Western irrigated agriculture is a big part of that. So here are some of the infrastructure priorities that we're looking at right now. Water supply, that includes above ground and below ground storage opportunities. Modernizing conveyance facilities. Many of the Bureau of Reclamation facilities and other water projects in the West are 50 years or older. I live in the Klamath Basin here in Oregon. The Klamath Irrigation project is over 100 years old. It's one of the 3 oldest in the country. So we've got a challenge out there, modernizing these facilities and actually trying to keep some of them from crumbling completely. Improved water use efficiency, that's a big thing that we work on with the Irrigation Association, looking for more opportunities to expand and improved technology related to irrigated agriculture and water application on field. Water quality improvements is also a form of infrastructure, desalinization, those sort of things. Hydropower, I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation today. And then we're always looking for opportunities. The real challenge here is how do you finance this? Who's going to pay for all this new infrastructure? And then there's also ways to achieve cost savings by improving and streamlining the permitting process and the regulations associated with that. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what's happened here in the last year and what's happening now, both in Capitol Hill and within the administration on water infrastructure. So as you know, here earlier this year, President Trump rolled out the kind of long-awaited infrastructure proposal. It's kind of got four key components. One deals with state and local grants. Another is emphasizing rural infrastructure assistance. Looking for transformative projects that can kind of be used as a template for success in other areas, and then looking to fund existing credit programs. At the same time, in the last year, there's been executive orders issued by the president intended to streamline environmental review and permitting processes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So some of the things that have happened here in the last year include just lots of hearings. Just starting about a year ago, we started having oversight hearings on infrastructure, and lots of other things happening, both with the Senate the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee, the House Resource Committee, teeing up issues for consideration to form the basis for legislation to tackle infrastructure challenges. Oops. So right now, last year there was action taken on a couple of bills. HR 23 is sort of California focused, really focused on the Bay Delta and how it's being managed in California, but there's also some other Westwide provisions that were included. That passed through House Committee. HR 434 is a new water act that provides some new financing mechanisms for the Bureau of Reclamation based on some existing financing mechanisms that other agencies use. And we got a sense of what's going to happen this year in Congress. Paul Ryan here recently made some statements about how infrastructure is going to be tackled. And it really looks like there's going to be several infrastructure packages that are going to drive what's happening. So the president's, sort of major infrastructure plan isn't going to be rolled out in one fell swoop. It's going to be tackled with various pieces of legislation. And this recent omnibus package that was signed into law in the last few weeks, he called it sort of a down payment on the infrastructure plan. And he also made reference to the Water Resources Development Act. That is the every other year authorization legislation that takes care of Corps of Engineer programs primarily, but it's also been used as a vehicle to advance other water infrastructure proposals in the last few years, including the WIN Act from 2 years ago, which included some pretty California-heavy provisions intended to help out the drought conditions there. An issue that's very important to our members is finding ways to streamline the permitting process associated with developing new storage projects and other water projects. Pat O'Toole, the president of the Family Farm Alliance, recently testified before the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee, and he's testified other times on the challenges that he personally had with working on a 20,000 acre-foot water project in Wyoming. This is a project that took less than 2 years to construct and over 14 years to permit. The permitting process right now is so daunting that some incredible projects that are out there aren't even being pursued because it's so uncertain as to how much time, how much expense, and what the ultimate result's going to be after you get through the sort of complicated permitting process. So this has been elevated over the last 10 years, and now we've got legislation intended to deal with it. HR 4419 by Representatives Newhouse and Reichert would propose a sort of WERDA-like process to deal with reclamation projects. Right now, the Water Resource Development Act, basically it says the Corps of Engineers will put together a chief's report that has projects listed in it, and then those projects can go ahead and be implemented. It's sort of a way to get by the earmark ban. This bill will do the same thing for Bureau of Reclamation projects, and the bill also authorizes some new projects as well. H.R. 1564 is the House version of the Water Supply Permitting Coordination Act by Mr. McClintock from California. That bill passed the House last summer. There's a Senate companion bill authored by Senator Barrasso, which got folded into a broader Western water package that was introduced by Senator Flake here a couple weeks ago, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It puts the Bureau of Reclamation as lead agency for NEPA permitting for new Western water projects that have a federal nexus. It's been called the one-stop shop for storage project permitting. So these are both very encouraging as far as legislation that will hopefully encourage development of new water infrastructure. On the energy side, you may recall in the last Congress that Senators Murkowski and Cantwell had a bipartisan energy policy bill, which passed the Senate with strong support, but it never made it to the finish line before the Congress ended. That's been reintroduced. There's also been provisions of that Senate bill that were introduced by Mr. Walden from Oregon that specifically deal with water infrastructure challenges here in the Klamath Reclamation Project. So this picture here is a press release from last fall where Mr. Walden and local proponents and state proponents of that bill had a press conference. The House in November passed H.R. 3043, the Hydropower Policy Modernization Act. There's a lot of stuff in here. The important part of this is that it does address hydropower relicensing improvements and small conduit projects. I want to talk briefly here about a similar legislation that passed in 2013 when President Obama was in office. There was legislation intended to streamline the process associated with developing hydropower in closed systems, like say an irrigation project that's got a screen on the river or conduits. This, again, we had members of ours that were trying to do these things on their own, and to get the permitting done with FERC was taking a horrendous amount of time, and expense sometimes even more than the actual constructed facilities. What this legislation did is it really streamlined that, and when you look at it, really these are no-brainers as far as impacts to the environment. And not only that, they provide an extra sort of a cash flow stream that local districts can use to do infrastructure repairs on their own or reduce payments that their patrons have to make. This thing had pretty strong support both in the Congress and the Senate, but it wasn't moving because the administration had some concerns about NEPA issues. We talked to our friends at Trout Unlimited and American Rivers. They intervened and told the administration that, you know, there's some good things that could come out of this, and it's something we should support. The administration dropped their opposition, and the thing passed the House and the Senate within 10 days and was signed by President Obama in 2013. It's something that we're all very proud of, and it wouldn't have happened, I don't think, if we didn't have this great partnership with TU and some of the other conservation groups. This bill that I just teed up here on the screen has provisions that would expand that same sort of permitting streamlining to other parts of the country. So, you know, we just heard from the Speaker of the House saying how the infrastructure legislation will probably move. It's going to be several packages. WRDA might be one of those vehicles. And I'm going to talk about another vehicle that's recently, you know, kind of kicked into gear in the Senate. Senator Flake from Arizona, for much of the last year, conducted workshops and had some hearings on sort of a drought preparedness and a water infrastructure package for the West that would address some of the streamlining issues we talked about, transparency, getting a handle on the Bureau of Reclamation's aging infrastructure and where they're at as far as keeping up with all that. Title transfer, which I'll talk about here shortly, providing ways to make it easier to pay off, or I should say to transfer federal water projects to local operating entities who have paid off those projects. And then there was water rights protection issues and also groundwater recharge issues that Mr. Flake was looking at. He ultimately introduced his bill last month, and there was a hearing held on the 22nd of March. That's my boss, Pat O'Toole, right there. Laura Ziemer from Trout Unlimited was sitting right next to Pat on the witness dais. There were 3 bills that were introduced: S-2539, S-2560, and S-2563. Those 3 bills are all important to things that we've been involved with. The reclamation title transfer bill, again, would streamline the process and make it easier for simple, non-controversial projects to be transferred without the proponents having to go back to Congress. It would allow the Secretary of Interior to have some discretion, so based on certain criteria being met, the Secretary of Interior could allow the transfer to occur. Right now, you have to go back to Congress and get authorization to do that, whether you're transferring a 10-acre facility or a 10,000-acre project. You still have to get congressional approval. It's very expensive. You have to get a lobbyist. This is intended to encourage more sort of local control of water projects. And then S-2563 is a bill offered by Senator Flake that tackles a lot of the issues on the previous slide. It's got groundwater recharge, streamline storage permitting, water rights protection, and there's also some Clean Water Act issues that are tackled in that bill. Farm Bill is another mechanism that can be used to tackle infrastructure challenges, especially when it comes to looking for ways to improve water use efficiency. We expect next Monday, maybe a day or two later, the House is going to introduce their version of the Farm Bill. We focus primarily on the conservation title of the Farm Bill, and that's where we work with Trout Unlimited and others through the Western Ag and Conservation Coalition to advocate for conservation title programs that include funding, so Irrigation Association members and Family Farm Alliance members and conservation groups can kind of work on projects that improve water use efficiency and make the bottom line better for producers and also provide benefits to the environment. This is the Western Ag and Conservation Coalition, and Laura and I have been involved with this for a long time. It started up several farm bills ago, and now it's been reinvigorated and expanded. And you can see the members that are involved. It's really a great coalition of agricultural interests and Western conservation groups. And we don't agree on everything, but we started out with an understanding that there's great opportunities to do restoration and conservation work on private lands. And those private lands are going to have much better opportunities to do things that benefit the environment if they stay in farming and ranching rather than being a sort of maybe converted to condominiums or, commercial development. So based on that sort of simple understanding, we've been engaged on 3 farm bills now with this coalition, and we're even tackling more prickly issues as we get more comfortable with one another. It's been very good, and I can tell you when a congressman opens up his mail and he sees a letter advocating for certain principles on the farm bill and he has all these letterheads on top, they pay attention. So these are things that we advocate for in the Farm Bill relative to infrastructure and conservation dollars. We're always advocating to support the RCPP and the EQIP programs. EQIP is a program that many individual farmers and ranchers have used in the West. We want to use PL 83566, get more dollars into that, which is a very flexible program that can take care of a lot of water challenges in the West. And then we're also advocating for a farm bill that addresses and helps beginning farmers and ranchers and can at least partially help the wildfire funding challenges that we have in the West. Increasingly, the Western wildfires are having a major impact on our watersheds. I think we're going to be successful in the House bill, including language that makes irrigation districts and similar entities eligible to apply for EQIP. Right now, those are sort of landowner-driven programs, which is great. We want that to continue, but we'd also like to see opportunities for irrigation districts that represent multiple landowners to work on conservation projects coupled with maybe Interior Department programs that really provide a bigger bang for the buck when it comes to water quality and water quantity improvements. And we want to make sure that agricultural producers are always beneficiaries of dollars that come through the Farm Bill. It is a Farm Bill after all. And we know that there are challenges with efficiently getting those dollars on the ground without a lot of red tape. We're always looking for ways to improve delivery of those things. And I could say Trout Unlimited has come up with some really great ideas there that our coalition has backed. I mentioned title transfer. There's been several hearings in the House and recently in the Senate on that. Family Farm Alliance, just so you know, it's been an issue of ours that we've been advocating for a long time. And actually, in the early 90s, the Family Farm Alliance we had an initiative that was focused on trying to get some of these single-purpose projects transferred from the Bureau to local entities. And that was a key thing that we did. We helped probably over a dozen of those transfers to occur. But it can still be made a lot easier, and this legislation is intended to do that. This is kind of an interesting thing, too. I've never seen this before, but Interior Secretary Zinke, in their budget proposal that was included in the Trump budget proposal, actually included draft title transfer legislation in the budget request. So there's momentum on this, not just with Congress, but also with the administration. The bottom line is, when you can transfer some of these projects to a local level, to a local entity, it makes some of the federal regulatory issues easier to deal with. And plus, it also opens up opportunities for other grants that you might not otherwise be able to get, state grants and things like that, that can allow local managers to control the destiny of their local infrastructure. So we'll see what happens, but it's been very encouraging to see the level of attention being placed on title transfer. Quickly, I'm going to talk about regulations, just because, you know, right now the big question everybody asks is how are we going to you know, fund all these fixes? And there are some tools out there, but we know for certain, a lot of our members say, you know, we've got some great ideas. Federal government, help us and don't make things more complicated. And so the less regulations, the more streamlined permitting processes there are, I think there's going to be better opportunities to get these things done. There's cost savings in permit streamlining. So this administration has really emphasized streamlining the regulatory arena, I guess. And there was executive orders issued by the president last year that would limit the issuance of new rules. I think for every new rule proposed, 2 had to be taken off the books. That was the objective. I think it's been more like 5 have been taken off the books for each one proposed, a ratio, something like that. So they've been pretty effective there. They're trying to streamline the review processes for water projects and in particular energy projects. The Secretary of Interior issued a secretarial order to shorten the NEPA review process, sets page limits and time limits on NEPA review. The Clean Power Plan has been pulled back to be redone, and there's been numerous energy regulations trimmed back as well. Again, you know, this is all intended to find ways to get infrastructure built less expensively and quicker. So that's pretty much my overview. If you're interested in, you know, what we're doing, we have lots of our testimony and reports and such on our website. We just redesigned it here in the last year. This is an example of some of the reports that you can download that we've done recently. www.familyfarmalliance.org. And I guess, Elizabeth, however you want to handle this, maybe after Steve's presentation, we can both take questions, or I can take questions now, whatever works best for you and the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think we'll wait until after Steve talks to take the questions. So, Steve, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. How's that on sound? Can you hear me pretty well?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, all of you, for your participation today, and it's a great honor to speak to you. Our partnership with the Western agriculture producers is one of the most valuable ones that Trout Unlimited has. As we testified before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, we told them that our Family Farm Alliance partnership is the best that we have. We really appreciate working with Dan and Pat O'Toole and those members. So it's just a great honor, and we really appreciate the chance to be with you today. Sadly for you, though, our very best person to handle this topic is Laura Ziemer from Bozeman, Montana. I hope some of you know her. She's a great partner of Dan's, and she was in a ski accident recently, and she's all right. It was a bad accident, and it could have been much worse, and she's all right, and she's recovering. I hope you get to meet her and know her over time. She's one of the best advocates and most creative thinkers that we have for Western water, and I'm taking over for her. So you're definitely getting the junior varsity team today, and my apologies for that. But I'll try to do the best that I can. Two things. One is that the other thing is I'm an Easterner, and I know that's not good from a Western perspective, but I am the son of a woman who grew up on a dairy farm in central Pennsylvania. So I do have farming in my blood, and I really deeply appreciate the chance to carry on the family dairy farm tradition by partnering with groups like yours and trying to do things, find solutions that work for farmers and work for trout anglers and watershed health. It's a great challenge, and I believe that my background helps me look at things from a humble perspective in terms of looking at agriculture producers' needs as well as those of trout watersheds. So that's what I try to do, and it's been really productive work. I think we've made some great pieces of headway. Dan has mentioned some. I think there's others to mention, including making sure that the funding levels for the various programs that fund infrastructure and Western water and Western trout work remain high, even though they've been proposed for cuts for several years. Those are really good wins for us, and TU is really happy to have at least a small part in getting those wins. So just a word about TU. We've been growing the last 10 years or so, and in part because I think we have gotten better about partnering with agriculture. I'll just say that's been one of the key elements of our ability to grow and get better. I think for the early years of Trout Unlimited's time, we were prone, I think, more to see ag sometimes as an adversary and not enough as a partner. And so I think we've gotten wiser and smarter. We've learned from our mistakes over time, and we very much seek to be partners with agriculture these days. And I think we're getting better at it, but always we can do better, and we very much want to learn from you and from Family Farm Alliance as we go along. But we've got about 300,000 members and supporters. Most of the members and supporters are very serious trout anglers. I'll just say this with all endearment. Some of them are a little wacko on the trout angling. They pursue it very passionately. I'm not quite as wacko on that, but I am a trout angler and do like to get to the West to fish. Those are some of the very best fishing days. We are organized into about 400 local chapters, 35 states. We're really where the trout and salmon are around the country. And interestingly, my home state of Pennsylvania has the most Trout Unlimited members of any state in the country because we have such awesome water resources there. But the western states are very well represented in the Trout Unlimited solar system as well, and places like Montana and Colorado have the most Trout Unlimited members per capita of the states that we're in. We also now have 250 staff around the country. Most of them are on the ground staff, and they're doing watershed work, largely working with partners, including farmers and ranchers certainly, but others that you might not think of, like the mining industry and the hydropower industry. So trying to be a solutions-oriented partnership organization, which brings me to the topic at hand in infrastructure, and I'm delighted that you're having this discussion and that the Congress and the administration are focusing on it. God knows we need a major infrastructure overhaul. It is bad often, and it is shameful at times, I would say. We really need an upgrade. TU really looks at it in the following way. We absolutely need infrastructure upgrade. TU sees this in part, sees the solution in part, though, as being one where we improve our natural infrastructure, watershed health, the ability of watersheds to save and retain water, release it slowly, make sure that the water quality, improving functions of watersheds are healthy. So we see not only the man-made infrastructure as needing an overhaul and is extremely valuable, but we also see natural infrastructure such as good, healthy watersheds as being keys to making the whole system work well. On Western water, in particular, what we want to see over time are projects that provide multiple benefits, provide real and lasting benefits for ag producers, such as upgrading irrigation infrastructure on their farms and ranches, but also really making sure that when we do that as best we can and where we can, that we save water that is provided by the irrigation infrastructure upgrades and try to keep it in stream and try to make watersheds healthier. So those win-win projects that Dan talked about, and that's what we're really looking for and seeking, both on the ground in very place-based projects that we work with ranchers and farmers on, but then also on the policies that are being developed in the states and in the federal government that Dan went through very nicely on infrastructure. So multiple benefits, providing real benefits and lasting benefits to farmers and ranchers, but also hopefully saving water, that some of the water that remains in stream and helps the watershed out. That's our general approach to what we're trying to achieve on Western water infrastructure. So just a couple of examples of those. If some of you have worked with us, you probably know some of these, but I'll just highlight a couple, make a general reference to a couple more, and just to give you a flavor of what we're doing, what we're seeking, and then I'll get to the policy matters that are at hand that Dan was mentioning. So in the Methow Valley, we work with the Methow Valley Irrigation District up in Washington State. With them and with partners, we helped to secure $10 million to modernize and pressurize the infrastructure for the district irrigators. We serve as the construction manager for the project and installed over 80 irrigation wells and 4 large production wells. We helped to remove a headgate and diversion from the Twist River, which helped improve fish passage and clear the way for habitat structures and other restoration work in the project area. And the flow benefits have been really good, as well as the improvements to the water supplies for the farmers that we work with in the area. So that's one example of a work in the Methow Valley. We've also worked with Kittitas Reclamation District in the Upper Yakima to do a nice irrigation ditch lining project that saved a good bit of water and has really spawned a great partnership with that irrigation district on saving salmon and steelhead, but plus upgrading their irrigation infrastructure. Just 2 examples, but just more broadly, we've had a great partnership that's overcome a lot of adversity in the Klamath. Yakima, more broadly speaking, has been a great collaborative effort to solve some big projects there, solve some big problems there, and that overall project includes construction of some storage that will also help producers in the Yakima. So just a few other larger examples that we've been deeply involved in. And then just to get to the policy measures that Dan talked about, I'll just boil it down, I think, to a couple of those. First, the Farm Bill, we also see very much like Dan, and we're very, very in sync with Dan and the Western Agriculture Coalition here, provides a real opportunity to help with infrastructure upgrades, including both the man-made infrastructure and the natural infrastructure, and the improvements that Dan talked about to equip an RCPP and this underutilized law, PL 566, the Small Watersheds Law. All of those would greatly enhance our ability to do more good partnership work with farmers, and we're very enthusiastic about it, hopeful that it'll produce something good here in the newly authorized Farm Bill. And just, I think I'll just wind up and talk a little bit about the water bills that are before the Senate and the House that are being discussed and developed right now. It was a great hearing that we had back on March 22nd to look at those bills. And as Dan mentioned, we had Pat O'Toole and Laura Ziemer sitting side by side, right in the middle of the panel, and very much controlling the debate. I thought, Dan, it just seems like not enough folks in the West come up with ideas and solutions, but I was just delighted to see Dan and Laura Ziemer sitting side by side, actually coming up with some ideas and solutions to our Western water problems. The one that I'll just mention that I hope will stir a little bit of interest and questions is the following idea related to streamlining. One of the things that TU would like to see with the notion of streamlining are ways to increase the development of stakeholder-driven solutions in watersheds and in basins to solve water storage problems and dam building issues in particular. So what we would like to see, and we're working on this, and Dan's been great at giving us advice and counsel on how to do this the right way, is the requirement that when the Bureau would consider streamlining to do a new project, that it would incentivize a stakeholder process to really look at all the different alternatives for water development and water conservation that could happen realistically within a particular watershed. So this is something that Laura Ziemer calls the portfolio approach to dealing with the water storage issue, really looking at all sorts of different ways that water can be conserved and developed in addition to building a new structure like a new dam, just to make sure that we're really looking at all the different possibilities, all the different angles, all the different cost-effective ways to conserve water as we contemplate new infrastructure. So the portfolio approach is one idea that we tried out at that hearing, and one idea that we're continuing to develop, and I hope that it can be something that will really enhance the infrastructure debate and make things better for Western water producers as well as watershed health in the West. So Elizabeth, I think those are the things that I wanted to cover. Once again, thank you so much for having me. Sorry that my slides were not quite as nice as Dan's. I'm a little bit older than he is, so just not quite as sharp as he is on the old PowerPoint, you know. But we're really pleased to be participating in this discussion. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. Really appreciate you stepping in today to share about what Trout Unlimited is working on. We have some good questions that have come in, and I just want to encourage all the audience members listening still. We have over 60 people on this call, so please feel free to submit questions as we continue talking. It's in your GoToWebinar toolbar. You can see that functionality there. It's just for the questions, and you can submit them at any time as we're talking. So the first question is about the Western Agricultural and Conservation Coalition. Has WAC reached out to the Columbia Basin Development League for inclusion? And maybe Dan or Steve, you can just talk about how who the WAC members are, how they became members, and how new members come into play.
Well,
why don't you go ahead?
Go ahead, Steve.
No, I wanted you to take the bulk of it. I'll throw in after you.
Yeah. Well, so I believe the Columbia Basin Development League had representatives join us at our face-to-face meeting in Reno in February. And, if folks are interested, all they need to do is contact me or Laura or Jeff Eisenberg, who is our sort of a staff director out of D.C. that coordinates things for this coalition. We generally only meet once a year face-to-face, but we started out probably with just a half a dozen organizations. It was Trout, Family Farm Alliance, Irrigation Association, California Farm Bureau, Wyoming Stock Growers, and I think maybe the Arizona Cattlemen. And it's expanded, and it's very effective organization. And if folks are interested in joining, it's just a matter of contacting us. It's not very expensive to join. And I anticipate that this coalition is going to get much more probably powerful in the coming years, just based on what I've seen in the last couple of years. So, if you're interested in contributing, we've got a steering committee that kind of takes a look at things, and generally, we're looking for folks who either have an ag or sort of a conservation bent if you're from the West, and you're willing to kind of work sort of on these blanket type issues. We don't generally get involved in specific issues in various neighborhoods. I think we generally try to tackle those things that have a collective or have a benefit towards our collective benefit of our organization. So it's kind of general principles and that sort of thing. But yeah, we're always open to new members, and if somebody's interested in joining, just feel free to call. I think my contact information, it's there on the screen. Feel free to send me an email, and then I'll pass it on to the group.
Great, thank you, Dan. That was very helpful. The next question, Dan, if you could just talk about maybe what you know about the status of the current Farm Bill, both in the House and the Senate, but obviously mainly the House, and anything that you can share about what is going on with the EQIP program in that bill would be helpful, and the different carve-outs for EQIP funding.
Well, Elizabeth, I would say if you want to weigh in on this too, and Steve, as far as dollar amounts, that sort of thing, I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. But my understanding right now is we're expecting a House bill to be introduced next week, and I know our coalition is going to have a conference call on this tomorrow. So there's going to be a lot of people weighing in that have been really closely tracking this. And I know, originally we were hearing that the Senate was actually going to be rolling something out last March. Just a lot of issues going on right now with SNAP. Also, I think what's happening right now with the tariff issues could complicate things. But with that said, we're going to have a very good sense of what's in the House bill in the next couple of days. I do know, as far as EQIP goes, there will probably be language in there that does allow irrigation districts and other related entities to apply for EQIP dollars. And I do believe that the dollars for EQIP will be at the same or maybe a higher level. But Steve and Elizabeth, Elizabeth, I know you've been tracking this stuff pretty close too. Feel free to weigh in with what you're seeing right now.
Dan, I'll just say that I think you're right on track for EQIP and RCPP, which is the program that came in the last Farm Bill. It has been useful to us after the initial kinks were worked out. I think that'll be in good shape as well. And then I think there's a chance that the PL 566 small watershed program might get a shot in the arm as well. And if all those things came to pass, it would be a pretty good House bill, I'd say. So that's a little bit more on the House bill. The Senate bill seems to be a little slower and a little bit more wide open right now.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you both pretty much covered what's happening there with the Farm Bill. The next question is about that, Dan, that you mentioned a bill that passed during the Obama administration. Can you repeat the number of that bill? And this person is asking if HR 3043 is similar to that bill.
Well, hold on one second. That bill passed in 2013. I actually have a copy of the red line bill that was signed by the president in my office. So here it is. It was HR 678. And that was the Small Conduit Hydropower Development Rural Jobs Act. And what that did is it applied to certain areas and certain authorizations that the Bureau of Reclamation had. There was other authorizations in parts of the country that weren't covered. Those provisions of those areas are covered as part of this larger bill that passed the House last year, in addition to some other permitting and streamlining issues associated with hydropower licensing.
Great, thank you. Is the infrastructure bill, I think they were mentioning kind of the current infrastructure bills, Dan, that you had talked about. Is it broad enough to include funding to support structural improvements to enhance fish passage above and below dams, as well as other barriers to fish migration on agricultural lands? So culverts or tide gates, etc. Pretty specific question if one of you wants to give that a go.
You know, I would say on Dan, I'll just start first and then you can jump in. So the bills that we have seen so far, or that we have glimpses of, like the House Farm Bill, have opportunities for that, I think, in terms of, using equip funds and RCPP funds to do that kind of work. So I'm hopeful, and PL 566 small watershed authorizations as well could get at those kinds of things. So, the short answer is I'm hopeful that those kinds of things will be boosted by the Farm Bill. On the other bills, Dan, you might know better than I. I don't know that the Senate Flake water bill has a specific stuff for culverts and fish passage.
No, it doesn't. And actually, I mean, there's the three bills that were introduced. One deals with sort of reauthorization of the Upper Colorado River Species Recovery Plan. So, that's an excellent program that provides ESA coverage and helps species on the Colorado River and gives coverage to the water users there. Senator Flake's bill, I don't believe, has specific provisions for those types of projects. And then again, the other bill is a title transfer bill, which doesn't specifically address those types of projects either. But Steve, your answer on the other opportunities through Farm Bill, I think, was spot on. There will be opportunities there, and I know there's other, like FREMA is a program that's been used in the Pacific Northwest. We've got some pretty good congressional attention on that as well. But as far as Senator Flake's bill, I don't think there are specific provisions that would get to that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has a couple programs that provide fish passage and some irrigation upgrades that help fish kinds of projects. Partners for Fish and Wildlife is another one that we've always been supportive of, and I know O'Toole's been a great supporter of. The one thing I'll say about them is that they were slated for some cuts in the last couple of proposals, and Congress, did not cut them, and they're getting good funding levels, and we want them to, and we think they will flourish in the coming years.
All right, so Dan, this next question is going to be for you. Of the 11-member Family Farm Alliance board, how large are the largest farms owned by the board members of the Family Farm Alliance? And I think they're looking for acreage size.
Well, I'm not sure. I've got those numbers. I mean, we've got a range of different folks on our board. Like Pat O'Toole, he owns, I think, several thousand acres that belong to his ranch, but he also has public grazing, and he has permits on public lands as well, for his sheep and cattle. Don Schwent is one of our members out of Colorado. He's got a pretty small operation that just focuses on sort of a niche market for alfalfa that goes to, certain types of livestock. So, I mean, there's a whole range. And then we've got guys in the Central Valley, that have large operations and fruit and nuts that probably their operations are up in a couple thousand acres. So there's a whole variety of I guess, acreages, and not only that, just the types of operations. We've got ranchers and we've got farmers, and I think we figured out that within our organization, just about anything that you can grow is grown by our membership.
Great, that's perfect. So I think we're coming to the close here. We do have a few people that sent in comments saying that this has been a very informative webinar and thanking the panelists for their great presentation. So I want to echo that. Thank you so much, Dan and Steve, for participating in this webinar today. Just in closing, we do have one more Bringing Water to Life webinar scheduled at this time. It's on April 24th. As I mentioned before, archived webinars are available on our website, so please feel free to go there. And we'll be sending out an email tomorrow letting everyone know when this webinar is posted on our YouTube page. Please feel free to email me or either Dan or Steve with any questions, and thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.